In 1991, international news dominated the headlines with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the Gulf War in Iraq, and the repealing of apartheid in South Africa.
We celebrate not the victory of a party, but a victory for all the people of South Africa.
In music, Queen frontman Freddie Mercury's tragic death brought renewed awareness to the AIDS crisis. In film, queer indie cinema came into focus with Gus Van Sant's My Own Private Idaho. A long overdue milestone for Black filmmakers was achieved with Daughters of the Dust. And The Silence of the Lambs gave us one of film's most iconic villains.
What do you think Hannibal Lecter would say upon receiving this Oscar?
Well, if I hadn't received it, you'd all be in trouble.
The Oscars famously aren't very kind to genre films, and specifically horror movies don't do very well. In fact, to date, only 6 horror movies have ever been nominated for Best Picture, and only one won, and that was Jonathan Demme's The Silence of the Lambs.
In a film about serial killers that includes cannibalism, dismemberment, all sorts of different creepy things, somehow the most tense part of the film are the 8-minute conversations, these long, drawn-out chess games between Clarice and Hannibal Lecter.
The way he first meets her, he's standing to greet her, just standing in the middle of his cell, silent, and he's just waiting. And that alone gives him so much power.
May I see your credentials?
Certainly.
Closer, please. Closer.
The calmness of his diction, the way that he indicates that Hannibal Lecter is a man of sort of discernment and intellect and education and good manners, and all of that conspires to make him even more terrifying when he unleashes just the tiniest little, you know, that little tiny sound. It's just terrifying.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
I have an intuitive knowledge of how to play these guys for some reason. I don't know why. It doesn't disturb me that I seem to have a facility or an instinct about them, but I do. I can't explain it. I can't analyze the part of Lecter intellectually, but I know him.
I remember watching Silence of the Lambs as a young woman and realizing that there was another layer of creepiness to the film. And it was this idea that as a woman, you were constantly being preyed upon and being watched, and you had to constantly be on your guard.
With Clarice being a younger woman navigating this intensely male field, there's this great scene with her in an elevator being completely dwarfed by the other male agents, and she's trying to literally carve out a physical space for herself. It's such a rich portrayal of a female character in this law and order institution that we don't normally see.
You know, we get a lot of detectives here, but I must say I can't ever remember one as attractive.
Silence of the Lambs is complicated for me because it is simultaneously my favorite film ever and extremely detrimental to the trans community. On one hand, there's a lot of good feminist ideals and politics and stuff in there, and it's just phenomenally entertaining. But unfortunately, there's also a portrayal in there that plays into a lot of stereotypes that have really dogged transgender women and transgender people since it came out.
The Buffalo Bill character is, of course, in modern day, a very problematic character because there are elements, there are suggestions that he is struggling with his sexual identity and that perhaps he would be trans, perhaps he wants to be. Jonathan Demme has said that he didn't think of him as being trans so much as just hating himself, hating his own skin so much that he needed another skin. But I do think it's a valid conversation to have about this film, that we have to be mindful of what we're watching and mindful of what we're vilifying when we see this movie in 2023.
The boom in production in the early 90s meant that every film didn't have to appeal to every audience. They were making a lot more movies that were meant for women. Women-focused narratives of 1991 are still pushing the boundaries, mostly because a lot of them have 2 women leads and no men, which was pretty unheard of at the time.
Thelma and Louise is a landmark feminist film, and what's so brilliant is that it talks about the patriarchy in a very masculine film genre, in the car chase thriller genre.
This was a summer action movie. That's how it was marketed, with the road chase and the cops and the helicopters and Harvey Keitel barking into a walkie-talkie. And what it really is a story about 2 women who refuse to be abused any further. And weirdly enough, the synthesis is what makes the movie so memorable.
Ridley Scott really loved Callie Khouri's script for Thelma and Louise, but he originally just wanted to produce it. He actually went around to various studios trying to find directors and immediately ran into the sexism of Hollywood. He said he would be sitting in meetings where people called these characters bitches or called it a women's movie made for TV, and it made him so angry that eventually he was complaining to Michelle Pfeiffer, and she said, "You know that you're Ridley Scott, right? You could just direct this movie," and he realized maybe he had to.
Thelma and Louise is a road movie. It has elements of comedy, has elements of action, but it's a film that looks at the realities that the survivors of sexual assault face.
For Thelma, her assault happens on camera. We see it happen. We see the aftermath. For Louise, it's implied that it happened many years prior, and it's something that she carries with her. But they are not defined by this. They're defined by their friendship and what they're gonna do next.
The mystery element to Louise's story, where she keeps referring to something that happened to her in Texas, grounds the film in some humanity, because you know that she's had these experiences. She's not just reckless and going on a spree. There are some real deep reasons to why she feels this is the only recourse.
It happened to you, didn't it?
This is an action movie, but it's centered on female friendship, and its stars are 35 and 45 years old at the time, and that was very, very rare. But what you needed in this movie to make it work was a sense that these women had been living their lives, and they'd been putting up with stuff for 35 and 45 years. And so by the time they get to this road that breaks them open, all of their experience and all of the things that they put up with is the stuff that infuses their rebellion. And I love that about this movie.
1991 is a year where you have 2 big films that are about women having to defend themselves and then going on the run. One is Thelma and Louise, and the other is Fried Green Tomatoes.
This film follows Evelyn Couch, played by Kathy Bates, who is a housewife who is kind of struggling with her identity and struggling with midlife. And she ends up connecting with this old woman named Ninny Threadgood. And Ninny starts telling Evelyn these stories about these women, Idgie and Ruth. And they form this incredible bond that, while not stated directly, is romantic. And because of the time period, they can't be together.
In the original book, there was actually a queer relationship that was very much on the page. They consistently talk about how much they love each other. They did remove that part for the film in order for it to become a mainstream film, but the queerness is still very, very present in it. And for those who knew what they were looking for, a lot of lesbians looked at this and said, "Oh wow, I'm finally on screen."
The director has since said that when you're watching the flour scene where they're smacking each other with flour and making all the baking together, that's his equivalent of a love-making scene.
By telling these stories of Idgie and Ruth, Ninny is able to give Evelyn some power. She starts going to women's groups, she starts working out, she finds herself.
Tawanda, righter of wrongs, queen beyond compare. How many of them hormones you taking, honey?
This is a movie about different generations of women finding each other and finding strength through each other. And to me, we don't see that enough on film.
One of the more interesting parts of 1991 is a very short-lived marriage between James Cameron and Kathryn Bigelow produced two of the biggest action movies of the 1990s. Both Kathryn Bigelow's Point Break and James Cameron's Terminator 2 actually came out within a week of each other, and even though Point Break didn't make the box office that Terminator 2 did, they both kind of had the great drive of two filmmakers who cared a lot about action and just producing the most exciting action on screen.
There's a period of time where Keanu Reeves and his particular acting style were really made fun of, and Point Break was along for that ride. I think we look at it now, though, and we see an actor that is perfectly in tune with the vibe that Kathryn Bigelow was going for. This is really a key action film for Keanu Reeves.
You have Keanu Reeves being really good, like really good. He was mocked mercilessly for the "I am an FBI agent."
I am an FBI agent! I know, man, isn't it wild?
But the whole point of that character is he's trying too hard. Like, he is overmatched and he knows it. He's out of his league and he is trying too hard. He tries too hard to be a cop. He tries too hard to be a bank robber. He tries too hard to be a romantic hero. And somehow Reeves lets you know that he knows.
Point Break also stands as this kind of interesting movie where the villain is so charismatic that you are basically on his side. He does pretty evil stuff, but you, the audience, the main characters, you're all kind of turned on to him.
Bodhi is very much trying to impress Johnny Utah and also show Johnny Utah that he's always one step ahead of him. And Johnny Utah, for all his, I'm a cop, I play by the rules, very much wants to be in Bodhi's good graces. Like, there's almost like a mentor-mentee bond going on, which makes the character of Tyler the most interesting in this film for me, because she's the lone female character amongst all these quote-unquote macho men, and she's the one that kind of sees everyone for who they really are.
I think the scene of Point Break that everyone knows and that is so beloved is the foot race scene where Keanu Reeves is chasing Patrick Swayze after a bank robbery, but Keanu Reeves gets injured and falls, and you see Patrick Swayze escaping, and you have this extreme close-up on his face where he's still wearing the mask that he was wearing for the bank robbery. And so you just have these piercing human blue eyes shot through this plastic mask, and kind of this unspoken realization that both men have of, there is something that intrigues me about you, there's something that binds me to you, and Keanu can't shoot him because who could?
James Cameron wrote and directed the original Terminator, but by the time Terminator 2 came along, he had already established himself as a master of the sequel after Aliens. He knows exactly how to up the ante, expand the scope of the threat, develop the characters. Everything a good sequel needs is in Terminator 2.
Everyone had the same concern, that how are you gonna take a movie that was so successful and that people liked so much, maybe their expectations are gonna be too high. And then when we finished the film and we tested it, that was one of the first things they wrote down. I enjoyed it more than the first one.
I think Cameron was very smart in realizing that as successful and as effective as Arnold Schwarzenegger was as the Terminator antagonist in the original film, if audiences were going to come back, he was too iconic. They would be rooting for Arnold. So he knew he had to make him the protector.
Come with me if you want to live.
It's okay, Mom. He's here to help. It's okay.
But it meant that he had to find a even more threatening antagonist. And so how do you, improve upon the original Terminator concept? Do you do something audiences haven't seen before?
People credit Jurassic Park as being a fundamental game changer for visual effects in film, but it's really Terminator 2 that came along 2 years earlier that changed everything.
Robert Patrick, as the T-1000, is playing nothing. He, in fact, doesn't even blink or breathe while he's running. It's this amazing feat that he's performing. That's why you're so weirded out in the sequences where he's running, because he's not breathing as he's running.
The fact that Sarah Connor re-emerges as this traumatized badass was also hugely influential. It kind of gave rise to a whole lot of female action stars in the years that followed.
In Terminator 1, she was more of a passive character, always on the run, in over her head. Terminator 2 just flips all of that, and she is just this aggressive force of nature. She is a bigger badass than the Terminator, who shows up and is kind of kept in check by John, being told not to kill. He's trying to learn his humanity, whereas Sarah Connor is trying to get rid of her humanity to prepare her son for an inevitable future.
We are thinking about, in the 90s, disarmament and can we stop ourselves from destroying the world? And it's nice to have a character in this one who is part of that, who has to make that decision, and does. He makes this sort of noble sacrifice to prevent the future from becoming what it is, and actually derails that strange Calvinism, right? Like, at the end, Hamilton's speech suggests, well, maybe the future will find a new way now. Just this glimmer of hope.
The Addams Family movie took goth spookiness and packaged it into this very accessible, family-friendly format. It's not a horror movie per se, but I think it's a comfort film to a lot of people who are morbidly inclined.
The biggest thing for me is that this movie looks amazing, and it's because it was directed and ghost cinematographed by Barry Sonnenfeld, who works with the Coen brothers all the time, one of the best in the business.
The Addams Family is the family I wish I grew up in. It's the most healthy family dynamic that I was exposed to as a child. They are people that love each other for who they are. They so completely and intrinsically support each other, and you see it peppered throughout this movie that you would never think to experience that in. And that is the magic of what they do in this movie.
What makes the Addams Family so abnormal is not that they're goths or gothic or that they live in a big old house or that they wear head to toe black. It's that they're in love with each other. So that's not a typical marriage. You know, they're so passionate about themselves and about each other and about their family. And it seems bizarre. That's what actually makes them odd.
Your turn, my ecstasy. 50,000 going once, 50,000 going twice. Sold to Morticia Addams for $50,000.
You watch Wednesday Addams navigate girlhood with this almost kind of brutality and a braveness to her. When her complete opposite comes to her and they have these interactions, the good girl is actually quite mean. She's really not that nice at all. And it's Wednesday who's quite authentic and real.
Are you sure they're real lemons? Yes. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll buy a cup if you buy a box of my delicious Girl Scout cookies. Do we have a deal? Are they made from real Girl Scouts?
The thing I love about The Addams Family is how it tells you to be as weird as you want to be. It's a film that tells you if you're a square peg, don't try and fit into a round hole. Just embrace who you are. There is people out there who are going to love you for your weirdness, and they're just as weird as you. And sometimes, just like Fester, they'll show up on your doorstep.
1991 had a lot of breakthroughs for black filmmaking, both by having the first African-American woman to have a feature film released in theaters in the US, and having the first black director to be nominated for a Best Directing Oscar.
John Singleton's Boys in the Hood came out when I was 13 years old, and I remember that being the it film of 1991. It was the film that all my friends were talking about. Even when it came out on VHS, it was like the tape that was passed around. Everyone had to see it, everyone had to discuss it.
This is, at a time when hip-hop is really making a name for itself. It's becoming the popular genre. It's where rap music and rappers like Public Enemy to NWA are talking about police brutality and talking about what it is like to grow up in these kinds of underprivileged neighborhoods. This is the first time you're kind of seeing, the people you grew up with in a movie. You're seeing them be relatable. This is huge for us.
Even though none of us had ever been to South Central Los Angeles, we deeply understood what it meant and what it felt like to be within a system where you didn't feel like there was any room to breathe. And I think that's one of the things that makes Boys in the Hood such a fascinating work, is that it's a film about a community that is frustrated, and the system itself is keeping them confined into a cycle of violence that they don't want to be in.
It's a very classical screenplay. It's about, the tragedy and the pathos of this situation. Ricky's story as somebody that's almost getting out, and a really good character and a moral character, suffering the tragedy because of others' actions around him is just very old school melodrama.
Look, I'm sorry about your friend. My heart goes out to his mother and his family, but that's their problem, Trey. You my son, you my problem. I want you to give me the gun.
And I think for John Singleton to put this different representation on top of this very classic Hollywood script and storytelling was genius. And that's why I was able to break out of just, one community of film goers, and everybody watched that movie at a certain point, and it was a national conversation.
It's unprecedented for a filmmaker to come out of the gates just so fully formed with so much to say and so much clarity of thought. He was the youngest filmmaker to receive Best Screenplay nomination at the Oscars, and he was the first Black filmmaker ever to be nominated for Best Director, which is just a stunning feat.
I think Julie Dash's Daughters of the Dust is this bright, shining light in the Black boom of the 90s. We have all these slave narratives written with the white gaze, and then we have Alex Haley and Roots. And Julie Dash brings us this beautiful, poetic, and lyrical film, and it focuses on people and generations instead of trauma. She also focuses on a specific community, the Sea Island Gullahs, and their generations as they move into the New World.
Water. Dilo. Fire. Dippy. Yeah. Now, that's all what Grandma remember.
The Gullah are descendants of African slaves who kept a lot of the African heritage that they had before slavery. Daughters of the Dust is a film that is all about being on the cusp of change. So you have the Pezant family, and a lot of them are getting ready to migrate north, whereas the matriarch of the family is adamantly opposed to this because she's very much about staying true to the past, realizing that the power that the ancestors have given them. And you have the younger generation that's, let's go to the north. They keep talking about this new prosperous land.
Just because we cross it over to the mainland, it doesn't mean we don't love you.
On the one hand, you can see why the new wants to break away from the old. You can see why they want to leave the island. They want to find their freedom. There has to be a better way and another life. It's not a future that's known for these Black people. It's not a future that's even guaranteed. It's just a possibility. What you carry in your blood and in your bones is all who came before you. You carry their sorrows, you carry their trauma, you carry their grief.
How you can leave this soil, this part of our love, they're here in this soil.
You also carry their survivorship. You carry who this person was that comes to a new world and decides to make a place for himself and for his family. That's what happens in this story.
A lot of the popular films of the early 90s, I think, also showed baby boomers coming of age and kind of turning their lenses back towards the adventure movies of their youth.
Come back with me, if you will, to 1991, when the biggest movie star in America is Kevin Costner. Costner was a big enough movie star that in '91 he solved the Kennedy assassination and played Robin Hood, which is sort of amazing considering he had just won an Oscar for basically being Native American the year before. Prince of Thieves is a movie that should have been a gigantic flop, but there's a couple of things about it that just make it work, and it's not Costner. It's Alan Rickman, who probably deserves some kind of special award as the guest villain MVP of the late 80s, early 90s, because between this and Die Hard, the guy's batting 1,000.
Why wasn't there a prequel made for the Sheriff of Nottingham? I want that origin story and how Alan Rickman got to this point so badly. Alan Rickman turned down the role of the Sheriff of Nottingham several times. The only way he accepted it is that he could have carte blanche over his performance, and I think you're really seeing that that was the right decision.
Robin Hood steals money from my pocket, forcing me to hurt the public, and they love him for it.
Everybody looks at that Alan Rickman performance, and yeah, it's amazing. Like, he is having a blast. He is deeply funny.
No more merciful beheadings. And call off Christmas.
But it doesn't work with the rest of the tone of the film.
My world's turned upside down here.
cannot ask you to come where I'm going.
Kevin Costner's portrayal, with its modernness, actually is what ends up selling the film and bringing the story of Robin Hood into the present day. He was a little bit made fun of for the way that he played it. This was Kevin Costner from Bull Durham, but essentially in England in the medieval times. But it still somehow all works.
You didn't get a lot of Westerns in the 1980s and the early 90s, and City Slickers is really a tribute to a genre that we had moved away from. City Slickers made $180 million at the box office, and I don't think producers ever predicted that. This was a real surprise hit that was right up there with Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and Terminator 2.
I think that there's a handful of films that come to mind when I think of movies that you watched when you were a kid and then came back to as an adult and had a completely different experience with. When I watched City Slickers as a kid, it was fun because it was these grown-ups that are, your dad's age or older, just like, having a good old time with their friends. And obviously that was very appealing. Watching it now that I'm basically the same age as Billy Crystal in the film and realizing that it's actually a film about him having a midlife crisis, specifically that all the things that he used to do for fun, he's kind of aging out of. And he has so many more responsibilities than he did. And that's what City Slickers is about. And as a result, it's probably more poignant watching it now, if maybe a little less funny.
Jack Palance looms large over City Slickers. It's a very fun role. It's him poking a lot of fun at his old image and still managing to maintain it.
Too late to catch up to the herd before dark. Catch up tomorrow.
Man, we're gonna sleep out here? Just,
That's right.
And of course, I think a lot of people remember him winning the Oscar, doing those push-ups. But I think a lot of people don't know that he did those one-handed push-ups partially because he claimed that that is what allowed insurers to put him in the movie. That's what he did to prove he was healthy and able to make a film.
Highway 61 is a monumental film in a period of Canadian cinema known as the Toronto New Wave. And it was all Toronto-based filmmakers who were very young, very ambitious, and they were making films outside of what was seen as the mold at the time.
Bruce McDonald and Don McKellar, having just made Roadkill, they wanted to make another movie with Valerie Bougier, who was the lead in Roadkill as well. It's whimsical, really, now, to look back on it after 30-odd years and realize this is what they wanted to do. It's not like they were shooting for funding or they were trying to land an audience. This was that tiny point in Canadian cinema where at the end of the 80s and the early 90s, you could do whatever the hell you wanted, and if it found an audience, it would find an audience.
I think Earl Patchko is just one of the best parts of this movie. He plays this mysterious figure who may or may not be the devil. The scene where he is playing bingo and just pissing everybody off is so funny. And as you see his character kind of crumble and fall apart, it's just such a masterful performance.
Prepare to tremble. Behold the awesome power of Satan, Prince of Darkness, Lucifer, the Son of Light.
It does its own thing, and it's weird and silly and funny and dark, very, very dark here and there. And no one really knew how to process it because there hadn't been anything else like it. They wanted more Roadkill, and Roadkill was over. This is what happens when artists grow. But they grew in a way that scared people.
Highway 61 and the entire Rock Road movie trilogy is also really monumental in Canadian cinema because it's saying you don't have to go to LA or to the States or Hollywood in order to make a great film. You don't have to make a glossy film. You don't have to make a film that is pristine. You just have to make a film that really speaks to what you want to say. It really freed up the next generation of Canadian filmmakers to say, just make the films you want to make.
I love that Cronenberg's approach to a book, which everyone else has said is completely unfilmable because it is a bunch of drug ramblings, is to look at it and go, unfilmable, you say?
The thesis of Naked Lunch, both the original book by William S. Burroughs as well as the film adaptation by David Cronenberg, is that writing is dangerous. It's weaponized. That's why we're seeing these writing instruments like typewriters become these fierce monsters that can devour you.
Early on in the film of Naked Lunch, you have this scene where there are 3 writers sitting around over brunch talking about the act of writing.
To rewrite is to deceive and lie, and you betray your own thoughts. To rethink the flow and the rhythm and the tumbling out of the words is a betrayal.
This is the Beat Generation, and they adopt a style called free thought, where you just write your thoughts as they come. And they're saying, if you edit this, if you try to polish this, it's a form of self-censorship.
Is rewriting really censorship, Bill? Because I'm completely f***ed if it is. Exterminate all rational thought. That is the conclusion I have come to.
This is David Cronenberg saying, what if we exterminated rational thought in cinema? What if we just explored the demons in our head? And what would that look like?
The way that Cronenberg portrays the paranoia that comes with rampant drug abuse through the main character's perception of the world, people literally transforming into giant bugs, his voice being controlled by a literal cockroach that is also a typewriter.
Don't be such a pansy. Be forceful. Hurt me.
You see how he is afraid of everything he touches and its ability to control him, but he never really takes accountability for his own creation of those things.
The upshot of all this is a movie that is not necessarily easy to like, but a movie that is hard to not admire. Just the degree of difficulty, the ambition of sort of, taking on Burroughs and filming what a lot of people considered unfilmable. And on a special effects level, just the number of creatures in the movie and the way they're integrated, these sort of slimy, deadpan creatures who just kind of hang out at the bar. These are things that I think only Cronenberg could have pulled off. He almost makes slimy creatures feel monotonous. And that's a very particular vibe. And it's one that Naked Lunch hits perfectly.
Gus Van Sant's My Own Private Idaho was part of the new queer cinema movement of the 90s. Independent film that featured really queer narratives that kind of put homosexuality at the forefront. It still needed to be palatable to audiences, but they did a really cool job of keeping queer narratives at the core and not pandering to the audience.
My Own Private Idaho is not just about a queer community, it's about a community of sex workers, and it never judges those characters for being sex workers. You see why people do this profession and how it's an act of survival.
My Own Private Idaho also has a really radical view of rural queerness outside of a big city. You didn't see that very often in films.
I think what Gus Van Sant does really well is capture the feeling of chosen family, of camaraderie for those who have been disaffected, and the building of safety around that in the group of street kids that he focuses on in this film, specifically the hustlers, that all kind of coalesce into a working group that push everyone else outside.
The most important scene to me in My Own Private Idaho is the campfire scene when Mike, River Phoenix's character, confesses to Keanu Reeves that he is in love with him.
I could love someone even if I, wasn't paid for it. I love you and you don't pay me.
River Phoenix wrote this scene. It was only 2 pages in the original script, and on set, River turned it into this 6-page masterpiece.
I really want to kiss you, man.
I think it's an incredible credit to him as an actor that he could find a way to work in so much physicality into his performance, because after he confesses his feelings, he shuts down and almost makes himself as small as can be. He wraps his arms around himself, almost like he's bracing for impact.
This character fumblingly finds a way to tell this man he's in love with him and is rejected, processes that in front of you in real time, and then sort of snuggles in with Keanu Reeves. It's a beautiful, touching one of the best scenes to come out of the 90s, one of the best scenes in queer cinema, I think, and a real testament to what a talent we lost when we lost River Phoenix.